Nice to meet you.
Wie geht's Ihnen?
Oh, wow. Very good.
Yeah,
Impressive.
How are you doing
and
today?
So thanks for taking the time. So I think what you're doing is a very nice initiative, and yeah, so I'm happy to be part of it. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
sure, thanks. It's a pleasure for us. So, Professor Schymik, actually, we would love to have it in German, but unfortunately, my language is not enough for that. Honestly,
Don't worry.
so I hope it's okay if we do this in English.
Of course.
But we have that banger opening. All right. So don't you mind that we will record the thing to later move it on our socials?
Sure. You can record it.
All
Otherwise,
right.
it makes sense, I guess, to do a
Yep.
podcast. You don't
Sure.
record it.
Sure. Thanks. All right. Dear Professor Schymik joined us today. So it is the next series of our Silk Road Revival podcast. So I will briefly introduce the guest now. So Dr. Jan Schymik is an acting professor of economics at the University of Mannheim. He studies international trade, macroeconomics, and how firms organize, also looking at globalization, supply chains, and productivity. He earned his PhD at LMU Munich and was a Fulbright visiting scholar at Harvard Business School, which is quite impressive. Recent work includes industrial policy in rare earth supply chains and evidence on the benefits of working from home during the pandemic. Uh, our podcast consists of three parts. In the first part, we'll ask you some personal and work-related questions to get to know you and your works better. In the second part, we'll focus on one of your research works, which is the costs and benefits of home office during the COVID-19 pandemic, evidence from infections, and an input-output model for Germany. And in the third part, we will go through trade in tasks and the organization of firms, also a discussion followed by questions about this work. So I hope this will go good. One more time, thanks a lot for joining us, Professor Schymik. We value your time and your contribution.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for hosting this format and for the initiative.
Sure, thanks. So I guess we can move to the part one. So my first question will be quite general. So Professor Schymik, what first drew you to the field of economics?
I think to be completely honest, uh, it was more or less ignorance. So when I went to high school, um, I wanted to study something that involves the way how people make decisions, and I was also interested in languages. And with that in mind, to be frank, totally frank, I was not initially drawn to economics, but rather thought like doing something like business in the sense of working in a firm or a bank would be what I'm ultimately interested in. So that's what I signed up for. But once I started to study, it took me like a couple of weeks until I noticed that that's actually economics what I was more interested in. But at that point in time, um, I wasn't as much informed as you seem to be now today, and didn't really know what the field of economic was and what it involved. So I went in with this sort of uninformed decision, and then completely overturned my decision and gained my interest in the first weeks of studying, and took more economics courses until I totally switched to it. Um, and within the field of economics, um, I was pretty early drawn to field of international economics, both like trade and international macroeconomics, very broadly, because yeah, I mean these were like the big picture phenomenons. But then again, you have these like small microeconomic agents that do decisions on a daily basis that then aggregate up to macroeconomic responses. And that was something that I was very curious about from the beginning.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. And my question would be, so your research works lies at the intersection of economics, international economics, industrial organization. So how do you see all those branches of economics intersect?
So recently, so one part where we see it intersect quite recently is the field of industrial policy. So industrial policy, very broadly defined, is when governments try to support specific firms or industries in certain sectors that they deem as strategically important. In order to make them grow. And there's good textbook arguments for doing so. So, for example, there is this idea of an infant industry, which is per se like a productive industry if it just grows above a certain size threshold, and negative externalities just hold these industries back. And if the government intervenes, the government can sort of push the economy towards a better, more efficient equilibrium. And that is a field that clearly intersects between like the macro and international parts. On the one hand, because it affects the aggregate economy, some of these sectors are very large, we have input-output linkages. So in particular, when a sector is seen as strategically important, that often means that it supplies inputs to other industries, which are seen as like super important and critical. And it's also related to international trade because part of the policies that are implemented can be done with trade policies. Think about, for example, tariffs or certain export restrictions. It's also related to trade because, of course, industries in specific countries might compete with other countries. So also with this competition channel, you get to this international component. And like a couple of decades ago, industrial policy was seen as a kind of deadweight loss policies that might make sense individually on a country level, but not so much like in terms of like aggregate global efficiency. But that view seems to change, and it becomes very much popular both in research but also among policymakers to rethink this like negative paradigm with regard to industrial policy. And that I think, yeah, is just one example of a field where you see these interactions between international trade, macro, um, uh, and industrial organization as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks a lot. So my next question would be a little personal. So you have moved between LMU Munich, Mannheim, and a Fulbright stint at Harvard. What did each place add to your intellectual toolkit, and what practice from those environments you still use every day as a researcher or teacher? Some short stories would also be welcome.
That's a very interesting question because oftentimes um, these inputs, they are not so tangible in the sense that I like feel on the daily basis um, where these inputs are coming from. It's more like an intangible thing that you get ideas, and yeah, oftentimes you just realize a couple of years later what you have learned during that time. So what I definitely learned a lot during my time in Munich is, I mean, there was many seminar guests and there was a lot of interaction, and the whole program took a lot of effort in thinking about why certain research questions matter, how to explain this research also beyond like field to like general interests, like economics from other field, but also beyond economics. Um, and because the department was fairly large, also you get a lot of influence from other fields and you learn different methods. Here in Mannheim, that is the same, but I would say the focus is a bit more on the like hardcore quantitative methods. So in terms of math intensity, I would say the exposure here is just a bit more. So people do more structural minded work. So both in empirical, but also like in theory, um, is a bit more structural, i.e., model driven. Um, in Munich, it was a bit more about finding good natural experiments. And in the end, I think both methods complement very well. So the type of research approach that I like most today is one that actually manages to combine those both ways of thinking. So having some good natural experiment for causal identification, but then trying to identify channels and mechanisms via a model and not just like through the black box and just seeing, okay, that launches a treatment effect of X on Y, but like asking more questions of like what if questions. So what would you have seen if the world were a different one, and so on and so forth. So and that is a bit something that I learned here in Mannheim. But again, I think both approaches are very valuable, and I think the best research can be done if you manage to combine them in a productive way. In Harvard, what I liked a lot was that there you get like very easy access to people and ideas. So many people were coming in. Um, you could meet with so many great minds, um, and it was very open in terms of exchanging ideas. So I was really surprised in a positive way how little hierarchies meant when it was just about the exchange of ideas. So if you were to talk to people, it didn't matter whether this was like a very senior professor or a PhD student or a master student or a junior faculty. So these people were all interest driven, and that was something that I was very impressed by, and I think that's like one of the key key features that these very big famous universities in the United States have. That they all share this common goal of creating knowledge and understanding the world a bit better, and that goes beyond like hierarchies and yeah, fixed structures. Um, there were so many people and so many visitors also, not just from within the university, but also externals coming. That the sheer amount of opportunity to exchange ideas was tremendously large.
Got it.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Um, and so my question would be about um, research questions. Basically, looking ahead, like 5 to 10 years ahead, what are the questions about globalization and firm organization that are you curious about and are willing to explore in the future?
Okay, so 5 to 10 years, to be honest, is a fairly long view into the future. So maybe I will tell you a bit about like what I recently find interesting for the next couple of years. Not sure if it will be enough to fill like a decade of research.
Yeah, sure.
So recently, I became more interested. You mentioned it already about like critical resources and directed technological change as a response to certain industrial policies or supply restrictions. So think about directed technological change as changes in technologies in response to changes in prices or market size. So like one traditional example is the college premium. So part of the college premium in the United States can be uh, explained by the fact that certain technologies make it for college educated worker easier or harder relative to other technologies that are used by non-college educated worker. A similar thing applies to all kind of production inputs. So if you think about um, like the case of critical minerals, rare earths, for example, um, if supply is restricted and prices increase, one way to deal with this is that countries can try to find substitutes, and that is innovation. So given that there is a change in these input prices, countries can sort of innovate out of this lack of supply, and that is a channel that has been studied very intensively in the field of like macroeconomic growth and the like, where you say, okay, certain changes in technologies can create long-term growth, um, but or it has not been studied so much in the field of international economics when you want to evaluate the effects of certain trade policies, for example. Um, that is one field where I think we can still try to understand better how policies affect consumers in countries, um, both like in the short term, but also in the long term when countries can adjust their production technologies to certain shortages, and this can then trickle down through the whole economy via the global value chain. So that is what I'm currently one thing that I'm currently interested in. Another topic that I'm interested in is looking into order books of firms. So like mostly when you think about like textbook cases of what firms do, um, we tend to think of it like firm gets demand and then it chooses either its price or its quantity to produce to satisfy this demand, and that's like the optimization problem of the firm. But for a lot of firms, demand and the choice what or when to produce or how much to produce um, are not taken at the same moment in time, but it's rather the case that there's demand, then the firm receives an order for something. So think about an airplane. So an airline might order an airplane, and then this airplane order goes into the order book of the firm, and there is an order book that collects these things, and then it becomes an endogenous decision, like how fast does this airline want to build this plane, okay? So it can be very slowly and deliver it at a late point in time, but it can also hurry up production and try to push it out as quickly as possible. So the speed of production or the time to fill that order becomes an endogenous decision by firms. And that makes things interesting because then also this affects how shocks are propagated through the economy, because it's not just via prices or quantities, but also via how fast do firms react to certain shocks, like becoming more or less productive. So when I'm more productive, maybe I want to speed up production, or maybe I want to smoothen out some of my demand shocks. So when I have a bad demand situation, think about the COVID crisis, maybe I want to have some old orders that I can satisfy in order to get some revenue, in order to smoothen my production over time. And that is another topic that I have become interested in, both in terms of like empirically measuring it and seeing its consequences, but also thinking about it through theoretical models.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting.
Got it. So my next question would be a little me and my peers related. So many of our listeners are from emerging markets in Central Asia. So and they want to roadmap to do research like yours. I mean to do research overall. So what are the skills a person needs to develop in order to write professionally? I mean, the language. And are there any resources you would recommend for this?
So I think oftentimes it's very helpful if you have access to role models, um, in a sense that you can see how they approach these things, what they do, and so on and so forth. So my first big I, I, suggestion would be to try to um, either do an internship at a research institute or work for or with some professor as a research assistant or try to study abroad and meet people in the office hour, so that kind of thing. So try to make a personal connection. That is, I think, what I would suggest. I mean, if you are planning to become an economist in the longer run, economics is a field where most people, for most jobs, require having a PhD. So that route would suggest, okay, um, try to get into a good PhD program where you have a core education in microeconomics, macroeconomics, and whatever you find interesting. So there, I wouldn't say that you need to like focus too early on a specific field. But often it can become hard from emerging economies to kind of get the foot into the door to get into one of these programs. And for that kind of um, things, I think it can matter to try to bridge connections first and to do some sort of an internship, work for an international organization, intern there, try to do these kind of things. So typically, um, often people try to directly um, send emails to professors that they have interest in economics and ask them whether they can enter the PhD program. So that is something that I think almost never works, because we have these central admissions. So targeting individual people is something that just doesn't lead to success. So it's more about trying to first build up a bit of a personal connection, but not so much about like letting these people be your PhD advisor, but more about getting the foot into the door. And their interest actually matters a lot. So I think this is one way how like initiatives like yours can matter, because you're exactly doing this already, right? So we are talking now. So I think that kind of approach is much more productive. And can be a good way to approach. But then at a certain point, if it's about the PhD, um, it usually at most universities it goes via like a central application tool where you are ranked against other applicants from all over the world, and that's like the way to think about it.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
so
a lot.
much.
Very informative.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Thank you. So you have also written on Germany's early 2000s reforms, right? And how like uncoordinated policies inside a currency union can create big cross-country spillovers and etc. So if you had a chance to talk to a European Union policymaker today, for example, what would be several lessons from that work?
Yes. So to give you a bit of a background, so what we did is we studied how labor market reforms in Germany, which sort of had the goal to put the German labor market back on track in the early 2000s, as you mentioned it, how they kind of had effects within the whole Eurozone. So the tricky thing is, well, it's a good thing that we share a euro, but one potential cost of it is that individual countries cannot devalue their currency against the other partners in the eurozone. Okay, so I think since you are from Uzbekistan, you all know this experience. So Uzbekistan used to peg its currency against the US dollar. So during that time, once it's pegged, there is no room for doing independent monetary policy that adjusts the exchange rate vis-a-vis the dollar. And in the Eurozone, of course, it's the same because all these Eurozone member countries, they share the same currency. So their nominal exchange rate is by definition one. So if one country does these structural reforms, what can happen is there is spillover effects to these other countries, and these other countries, they cannot change their exchange rate. So it's going to have real effects on these countries. And this becomes a problem when there is no other way for countries to react. So think about like typical labor market frictions, which show that like nominally wages are downward rigid. So like nominal wages very rarely or very slowly decline in recessions. So think about, you have a contract, so this contract cannot be violated, and there's unions that want to prevent wages from like nominally falling. So of course, real wages can adjust because the price level can change, but nominal wages are sort of a bit sluggish. I mean, they can adjust, but not as flexible. Upward, maybe downward, hardly. And so that is the scenario that the Eurozone is in and was in. And so what these good reforms for Germany had then as an effect was that they were creating a positive supply shock in these other countries. And because there was no adjustment room for the exchange rate because they all shared the euro, and wages, nominal wages, were sort of fixed in the short run. This good policy in Germany created lower employment or even temporary unemployment in other countries like the Eurozone periphery. Think about like Spain or France. That is kind of what we studied, both like empirically and also then within the structural model, where we combine international trade on the one hand with a more macroeconomic model of downward nominal wage rigidities under a currency peg. And what we learned from this is that if you share a common currency, then you should also try to align your policy goals in the sense that such reforms, when they are sufficiently large, would work better if they are coordinated within the member zone countries. So if everybody implements similar labor market policies, everybody would increase their individual productivity, then there would not be these negative cannibalization effects between countries. That is kind of the key takeaway. That speaks a lot about optimal currency areas. So there is a very old literature about when should countries share currencies, and that already speaks into that direction. So if you want, you could say this is like a mathematical model that quantifies and rationalizes this idea that policies within those areas should be more homogeneous.
Got it. So Professor Schymik, my last question for the part one would be general. So when you were just entering the field of economics, what were some mistakes that you made that you do not want younger generations to make? And what things do you think would work best for a person who is just entering the field to develop more and faster?
So when I entered the field, so I had peers and including myself, and there were different approaches to it, and it's a hard trade-off, and it was very hard to kind of find the optimal between either reading a lot of the literature, which sounds very good at first, but if you read a lot, um, up to a certain point, you get ideas, but if you read so much and you want to create research, so creating research is not like learning, right? So it's like in terms of knowledge creation is just the opposite direction, right? So reading, informing yourself is you absorb knowledge, doing research is you create knowledge. So this is a very distinct task. Of course, up to a certain point, um, these things are complements. So if you are totally ignorant, it's hardly possible to create any knowledge. But on the contrary, if you read and learn a lot and you absorb a lot of knowledge, then it can also become very hard to create um, like knowledge because you might kind of feel discouraged and have the impression that we know already everything. So you can always go onto the internet and you will find maybe not the precise information that you're looking for, but you will find information on like literally every topic. And this can uh, actually become very discouraging when you are set on the quest to create knowledge. So my maybe it's a bit unusual advice, but I think an important trade-off to consider is exactly this trade-off. So don't be ignorant about the literature, but also don't read too much about everything, because then this discourages you as well from asking questions and creating knowledge. So there's a trade-off between like digesting information and creating them, and try to be very aware of this trade-off, um, and don't err on either side. So that will be my key advice. And I know people who lost time and interest and encouragement um, by erring on both ends. So I have friends and that read 2 years of their PhD, a lot of papers, and they were very discouraged by this because they had the impression that they would never be able to finish something that is equally good. But then I also had people who were writing papers totally ignorant, and then they found out that the questions that they were trying to answer were already answered by the literature before. So try to kind of find that sweet spot that is in between that.
Yeah, definitely. So here is the follow-up question. So as big papers, as writing big papers takes years to complete, and oftentimes your motivation often like shrinks. So how do you like navigate this tough process where you feel that everything is discovered, but you're trying to kind of come up with a good research question?
Yes, I think so. So I think I'm very bad person to answer this because I still haven't navigated to a good answer for myself yet. Um, and I think that is something that distinguishes like fantastic economists from like ordinary or good ones. So that is, I think, a key skill that you identify questions, and not just questions, also like pathways, how to address these questions to get to meaningful answers. Um, if you do the PhD, it's particularly difficult, first because you don't have the experience, but also because you kind of uh, start with zero projects. The longer you are in the profession, it might become a bit easier because you can sort of diversify. You have different projects you work on. They are in different stages in their life cycle, and sometimes something is about like just getting early ideas, while some other thing is about you present it and it's a bit more established, and some other things are about like polishing nitty-gritty details and changing some smaller things, and that makes stuff a bit easier. But again, but in particular at the beginning of the PhD, this can be particularly difficult.
Thanks a lot. Pretty informative. So this was the end of part one of our podcast. Now we'll move to the part two. So it will be the discussion of one of your research papers, which is the costs and benefits of home office during the COVID-19 pandemic, evidence from infections, and an input-output model for Germany. So I will briefly present the work to the audience, the context and the findings, and then we'll move on to the questions. So Germany's early COVID dilemma was clear: to cut infections without stalling the economy. So Professor Schymik and co-author Fedinger showed that about 42% of age with home capacity saw markedly fewer infections and deaths. The 62 sector input output model estimates that a strict policy where only work from home jobs operate costs roughly 1.6% of GDP per week, with big variation across industry heavy regions. So the takeaway here, I would say, is that keeping all WFH work from home capable workers removed and bring back the most system critical high multiplier non WFH sectors first to minimize both health and output losses. So I hope it was adequate, honestly. So I we can move to the questions now. So Professor Schymik, my first question would be: what first motivated you to study the costs and benefits of home office during the COVID? Was there some specific moment or data set or policy debate that pushed you to this question? Note here, like the reason should be something except the occurrence of the pandemic itself.
Okay, so yeah, so it should be something that is not just the pandemic. So I think um, what we noticed pretty early during the pandemic was that this is a moment in time where we experience beyond the epidemic crisis, we experience like a big economic shock, and that's a moment in time where with our toolkit that we have as economists can actually do have a big positive influence. So that like was like the sort of situation um, at that time, and our opportunity costs were low because there were no other activities. So we had a lot of time to invest into anything, and the demand for that I think was there. So that was the starting point, and at the time, what we first noticed is two things. So first, there was a study for the U.S. From Jonathan Dingle and Brent Neyman about who or how many jobs can be worked from home, and so we saw initially that Eurostat, so that's the statistical agency of the European Union, they have similar kind of numbers for workers. So you can kind of do a quick back of the envelope calculation about like what sectors like have people have a lot of people who can work from home and what sector have fewer. Um, so that was the first thing, and that in itself, this number I think is interesting because it gives you an idea how much of the workforce do we lose when there is a confinement and people don't work at the office or at the factory anymore. And the second thing was more related to what we do in like trade or macro when we think about global or national value chains, and there are input-output linkages, is that some sectors are obviously critical because they supply to other sectors. So there's a multiplier. on GDP, which is very high because this is a critical input for many others. So sectors have a high multiplier. So the motivation sort of was to bring these two things together and to give like a quick estimate, like how does this affect GDP when there is a confinement? And yeah, so there was this policy need, and people were wondering how costly is it in terms of how much GDP do we lose, and also of course like how can we lower these costs.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thanks. So, work from home isn't only fewer workplace contexts, but it may change commuting, shopping, and household meetings. So, every other social aspect of life except the work. And here, how much of the drop in infections do you think is from fewer contacts at work versus changes people make outside of work, like commuting and shopping?
Yeah, so good question. So ultimately, because we obviously we cannot see whether somebody who got COVID got it from the commute or the office or like in their spare time. But what we can do is, of course, we can look at the local level and control for other factors. So think about population density or certain socioeconomic differences between locations. And what we do see is that there actually is substantial differences at any point in time in like how many people work from home and how many infections or how are the infection rates. And what we saw is that there is a substantial negative correlation between the two. So like when you have more work from home in a certain region, there were significantly fewer infections. So from that we conclude that there must be a relationship. But of course, that being said, that's just at the local level. So we don't know whether this is because these people don't meet at the workplace or whether this is because the people didn't have to commute. So that is something that is sort of hard to determine for us. But there was this clear negative relation between the two.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Got it. So my last question for the part two would be, if another shock hits tomorrow, say pandemic or cyber outrage, what's the one hard-coded decision rule your paper says every government should make to keep the infections or the disruptions low?
So what we found is that what matters is this combination of this multiplier and the loss of the labor force because there are few people who can work from home. And the government should kind of ideally, I know there's all these political constraints, but like ideally, a government would want to um, prioritize those industries um, that have a large effect on GDP because they're central, and that can be large because there are actually a lot of people working from home, so the drop in labor supply is small, and because the multiplier is high. So that will be the key takeaway. Look at those multipliers. Look at what sectors have a lot of work from home capability, and then try to design a confinement in a way that you prioritize those sectors that are the most central ones in those two key dimensions. If that doesn't work, the sort of second best way would be look at this in a regional way, and you have certain industries located in certain areas, and then you can do the same argument on a regional basis. That is, of course, an indirect way of doing it, but that will be another alternative beyond the obvious opening, like critical infrastructure. Think about like hospitals and other things. I mean, that's sort of a bit out of question. But if you think about offices and factories, these are the two key distinctions to look at for a government.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Professor Schymik. That's all by me. We can move to the work of the model.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I learned a lot of insights. But I would like to discuss a different paper of yours, which is called Trading Tasks and the Organization of Firms, which I found really exciting. So, if you don't mind, I could briefly introduce the paper just in a few sentences, and then we could proceed to some questions I have. So, this paper asks what happens inside a company when it starts offshoring specific tasks, such as small steps in the production or management process, to other countries. So, the core idea I would say here is that task by task offshoring shifts useful information to the edges of the firm, meaning closer to where work actually happens. So companies start to decentralize. So companies, that means that more day-to-day choices are made by local managers, not only by headquarters. Uh, so, um, so the key takeaway as well is here um, that offshoring firms are meaningfully more decentralized, about 18% more than similar firms that do not offshore. And also, top managers' roles expand and become tougher, which explains higher pay at the top positions. So, yeah, please correct me if I missed any points. Yes.
Exactly. So I think you gave a nice summary of what the paper does. So essentially, this is a paper about the relation between what we call trade-in tasks. So most trade flows today is not trade in final consumption goods, but trade in intermediate goods. So um, speaking of tasks, so think about the economy as a big like Lego set of Lego parts, and we're not just trading the final output product, which is like the fully built Lego. It's more like these individual pieces that are traded, and there's specialization for certain parts of this value chain, and that is what we call trade-in tasks. So it's not us who invented this term. So there is a original paper by Jean Grossman and Esteban Hansberg who phrased this term, which essentially is called trading tasks because they have this task-based model where production requires a sequence of production tasks and labor is kind of split across countries. So these tasks can be traded, i.e. offshore. And what we do in the paper is then we ask, okay, if there is this trading task, does that affect the way how firms organize their decision making and their production processes? And if yes, so how does that feed back in the aggregate economy? And so that is the idea. So as you already said, so maybe a big multinational firm offshores part of its production, and because this changes incentives for individuals inside this firm, um, this also requires that decisions are taken at a different level and requires some reorganization of that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you mentioned here in this paper that basically task is a small step inside a job. So in a few words, how do you define a task like in the study?
So in the data, what we do is we look at trade flows for a firm, and we ask um, how much of the inputs that a firm needs to produce its good are coming from affiliates that this firm has abroad. So it's the share of intermediate imports from these affiliates that go to the headquarter in contrast to the total requirement of inputs. So it's a measure of intra-firm trade here.
Yes, got it. Uh, so my next question would be about decentralized firms. So as we know, the headquarters is the top office here, and decentralization means more decisions are made by local managers. So as I said, and not specifically by headquarters. So in a daily life, what does a more decentralized firm look like?
So the way we think about it is so this comes from a survey question. So we measure it with survey questions, and these firms were asked questions like who makes decisions on a certain topic. So think about who makes the decision on choosing the price. Is that done by like the owner or CEO, or is that done by like middle management? Um, or who takes decisions on hiring employees or firing decisions, who chooses the strategy. So all these kind of things. So there were like a set of questions on different topics, and then firms could rank between at the very top versus at the very local level. Think about like middle manager. Um, and then they were asked to rank between one, which was like at the top, until five, which is like at the bottom, and then we averaged across these different categories to measure this level of decentralization for a particular firm.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understood. Uh, yep. So when tasks uh, move abroad, local teams often have a fresher information about prices, quality, and something else. So why does that naturally push firms to let more decisions be made locally?
So there, of course, like it's a theory in the sense that it looks at a particular channel. So the channel we look at is the channel via profits. So because moving tasks abroad creates cost savings, profits increase, and if potential profits increase, um, this can create a certain tension between the middle management in a firm and the top management. And think about higher profits creating the conflict of interest in the sense that there's more at stake now because the profits have increased. And in order to motivate people, one way to do that is to give them power to decide about those those things. So you could think about this decentralization as a means to incentivize people, and when profits increase, incentives become more important. Um, but beyond that specific mechanism, you could think about other mechanisms going in a similar direction. So one would be having a managerial overload. So the firm becomes larger, profits become higher. So maybe that leads to delegation because there's managerial overload at the top. So think about like the boss cannot oversee everything. And as you just said, I mean, people at the middle management or at the lower management have information advantages, and at a certain point, those information advantages become just relatively more important because at the top there is strict like time constraint. Um, the other way you could rationalize this would be that there is cost of information acquisition, which would also give you like similar things. So this is not part of the model that we wrote down in the paper, but I'm just telling you this to highlight that there are similar predictions coming out of other models where firms choose about decentralization, where you would also get this result.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you. So you also separate production tasks, such as making, processing, from managerial tasks, such as scheduling and supervising and etc. So which type of tasks, when offshored, most strongly shifts decision power away from headquarters?
So what we found is that if you offshore part of the management tasks, then the decision whether this affects um, decentralization of the firm becomes ambiguous because you could think of these tasks as being more like fixed cost tasks. So if you reduce the fixed cost, there's also entry potentially coming into this thing. So other firms enter the market, and then things become a bit ambiguous. Um, if you do that for production tasks, so then it's more like reducing the variable production costs, and then it's an ambiguous decision in the sense that unambiguously profits increase for those firms, and there's more delegation. So it's not so much about the strength that offshoring has on delegation, but more about the direction. Um, and while reducing these variable costs by offshoring production unambiguously leads to more decentralization. The thing becomes much more convoluted and ambiguous when you think about lowering fixed costs by offshoring part of the management tasks.
Yes, I got it. And one of my last questions, if you allow, would be about so you basically your setting includes very like I would say open and expert heavy firms. So would you expect stronger decentralization effects in highly open sectors than in like more sheltered ones? Like what's the logic here? What's the intuition?
Exactly. So the logic is that, in particular, for those offshoring of management tasks, it matters how open an industry is, because when it's very open, this is going to affect how much entry there is. Okay. And then therefore it matters whether it's open. So then it's going to have an impact on with how many firms is this firm competing. Um, and therefore we do find this delegation increase only when it's a sufficiently open industries, because then this increase in profits becomes unambiguous.
Yes, yes. Uh, yeah, thank you so much.
With pleasure.
Yeah, I think you pretty much answered all my questions. So yes.
Thank
Sure. Thanks a lot, Professor Schymik, for your contribution and for your time. I had just a couple of questions more. So, Professor Schymik, did you dislike your 1 hour spent here? We are open to criticism, to new ideas, maybe. What was good, what was bad? A little feedbacks would be cool.
Thank you so much for inviting me. So I think you're doing a great initiative. I very much enjoyed it, and you were super well prepared. So that was fantastic. Um, so I think there is not much you can improve. Maybe like a minor idea would be if you can sort of for me at least, get some feedback from your audience, or you can collect questions, or you discuss it. Maybe not in this event, but maybe in subsequent event, discuss what you discussed with other people, and or maybe contrast people with what other people say about the career advice. So I would be also curious in your previous guest's advice, and to kind of make some connections here and there. But beyond that, I think you did a terrific job, and it's a fantastic format. And so I can just applaud you for doing that. And you're very well prepared and asking very sharp questions. So I really enjoyed my time.
So danke schön, Professor Schymik, für alles, für Ihre Zeit, für Ihre gute Laune. Auf Wiedersehen. Bye.
Yeah.
Auf Wiedersehen. Bye bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.